The big problem with our present government is its desperation to put out fires, its desperation to put out metaphorical fires, if not actual fires. Its desperation to shut down stories, and the way it does it is by evasion and by a sort of haughty put down. And I must say, I've had many letters, particularly from the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport, trying just simply to evade. And part of that is by answering answering a letter only after about 6 months, and then by way of explanation saying, "I'm so sorry, it got to the bottom of a very large pile," or "I'm so sorry, your letter went astray." I don't believe that at all. I think there's an effort to try and find a way to uh, to make the writer tired, to make the writer give up. And there is a point at which you do give up. There's a uh, there's a really interesting journalistic movement called Hunt and Gatherer, or the Hunt and Gather, and they do very interesting stories on Twitter. And there's one at the moment about judicial dodginess. I can only call it dodginess. I'm going to try and go through the story. It's a long video um, about two judges, Mrs. Justice Sarah Cockerel and Stephen Miles, and there's also a person called Duncan Matthews, who's a barrister. And right at the heart of the judicial system is this idea of independence. And independence is drummed into people. It's what you're told when you're sitting on a jury, that you must be independent, that you must only deal with the information you hear in the courtroom, that you mustn't talk to other people while the case is ongoing. This guarantees impartial and independent decision making, independent of external pressures, and independent of any sort of uh, tittle tattle from other judicial sources. So, particularly for judges, they are supposed to be independent of external influence and independent of each other. And the code on which they stand is that they are to be independent and to be seen to be independent, and that's important. Now, the problem is in 2021, two emails show up about these two judges, Cockerel and Males, talking to other people and compromising their independence. On the 26th of April, Sarah Cockerel made a judgment at 10 o'clock. At 10:06, knowing that the case was already putting in an appeal, and therefore there would have to be an appeal hearing and therefore permission to appeal, PTA, she then wrote an email to the barrister Duncan Matthews as a heads up, telling Duncan Matthews what decision she had just made. So the first instance judge contacted a barrister to give him a heads up while the case was ongoing, because as the case was going into an appeal process, that means the case was still ongoing. The case had not finished. Now, the problem here is that Duncan Matthews then spoke to Stephen Males, and it was Stephen Males who made the decision, who made the PTA decision, and rejected the option of appeal. The permission to appeal was denied by Stephen Males. By Stephen Males, exactly the same person that Duncan Matthews apparently had dinner with and briefly discussed the case, or at least it's implied that he discussed the case. And it's Duncan Matthews to whom Mrs. Justice Sarah Cockerel wrote at 10:06 on the 26th of April. So what you've got is this triangular relationship, the triangle of contact that should not exist. And Stephen Mayle says, apparently, that he was aware that Duncan Matthews had been contacted by Sarah Cockerel. Bizarre to say that. The appeal judge is already aware of the case, and so appears to compromise judicial independence and that triangle of contact. So what the hunt and gather journalists have done is to contact the Department of Justice and to ask about details of this dinner between Duncan Matthews, the barrister, and the judge who was deciding about whether or not to grant permission to appeal the judgment which had been made by Sarah Cockerel. Now, judges are supposed to be independent, and one way to make sure that judges are independent is to make sure is the way in which they're given cases. It's just first come, first serve, unless they have some good reason not to take a case. So you shouldn't be able to anticipate who is going to be the person looking after a particular case. And this triangle of contact compromises the independence of the judges and is dependent on a dinner initially assumed to be a private affair, and later a civil servant from the Department of Justice insists that it was a jolly judicial get-together that other members of Combar, the journalist faithfully explains, have never heard about and think highly unlikely, as we were on the date when it was supposed to have taken place, slowly emerging out of COVID lockdown. It smells of dodginess, does it not? Not only the dodginess of senior members of the judiciary, but also dodginess of members of the government. It smells of government collusion and evasion tactics, the like of which lengthy delays and replying in very vague and haughty put-downs when any letter is finally received is frankly familiar. We need a better standard of transparency and of responsibility and accountability, and I'm sure that the two judges and the barrister, all in question, have very good explanations and did absolutely nothing to compromise their role and their independence. But the government responses are so evasive, so tangled, so tardy, so odd, that they increase the sense that there must be something dodgy going on. And this isn't just one instance. This is again and again through the whole of our present governmental system. It's sort of instant after instance of letters coming back. You write to your MP and you get this evasive, dodgy, general letter which doesn't answer the specific question you've asked and which is tossed off as something to keep you happy. You write another letter back, and 6 months later you get another vague put down, which again is tossed off by somebody who thinks that you're going to be satisfied with it. I'm tired of having these toss-off, dismissive letters that are penned apparently by my own MP, but clearly have been written by a civil service department. The grammar is different. The paragraph that they've written is just nonsensical. Or there's an entire letter written by somebody which makes no sense. And the assumption is that because there's so much time that elapses between my letter and the reply, I would have forgotten what I actually said. And there comes a point where you just think, what is the point of writing anymore? Particularly to go through my MP. What is the point? And similarly, these journalists think, what is the point of constantly banging our heads against the same brick wall when what we're getting is evasion, which simply makes these judges look all the more dodgy? Which I'm sure in the end is not the case. I'm sure there is a good explanation. But the civil servants are not helping this, presumably because they've been instructed to say as little as possible. Well, either you have transparency, either you have accountability, either you have this tradition of answering letters, or you just get rid of it and say, no, 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 we're operating some sort of democratic tyranny. Because this gesture, this perversion of English, this perversion of written words, which is supposed to, which is some sort of pretense at transparency, is actually a problem in itself. And God forbid that you might be some sort of whistleblower, that you might, for example, have testified and thrown yourself onto the system in the hope that the system is going to save you, in the hope the system is actually going to look after you because you've done your duty. I can think of a number of cases where people have called out wrongdoing in the NHS, and they themselves have been victimised and victimised and victimised by a confederation, it appears, of the judicial system, of the law, of the NHS, and of the government. And the idea in this country is that the government is supposed to be independent of the law. Well, tell me if you think that the hunt and gather story that I've relayed as well as I can suggests that there's independence going on. It suggests collusion, doesn't it? It suggests chaos. It suggests dodginess. I think it's wrong. And far be it from me to say that Mrs. Justice Sarah Cockerel and Stephen Mayles and Duncan Matthews are all doing something inappropriate. Far be it from me to say that. I don't say that. I'm not saying that. Other people might. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the government, the civil servants who are responding for the government, who are writing letters back, are simply making a complicated system significantly worse. This tissue of evasion and obscurity. They seem to want to obscure their way out of responsibility.